Let's jump right into this community briefing. If you teach engineering, you definitely know the struggle, trying to get students to actually engage with the material instead of just blindly memorizing formulas. Well, today we're looking at a brand new pilot study focused on a hybrid writing-to-learn pedagogy that's designed to spark real metacognitive engagement in our STEM classrooms.
The core question driving this? Can structured writing cycles genuinely improve critical thinking for sophomore engineering students? We've all seen students just plug numbers into equations without grasping the actual physics behind them, right? This study essentially asks if having students write out their thought processes, explaining their reasoning, and acknowledging their own learning gaps can shift them from passive listeners to active analytical problem solvers. It's a fantastic question, and the team took a very systematic approach to figuring it out.
Before we get into the results, it's absolutely crucial to define the scope here. We are looking at a highly focused 2025 pilot study conducted at a single public HBCU. The cohort was exactly 11 sophomore students in a basic electronics course, specifically Industrial Electricity, or ITE 111. So we're definitely not claiming broad, multi-campus proof today. Instead, think of this as a deep, localized snapshot of how to implement and measure a culturally responsive pedagogy.
So how did they actually pull this off? They built a really clever hybrid routine. Mondays and Wednesdays were your standard in-person instruction. Then on Fridays, students went onto Canvas for specific assignments. Across the semester, they ran through 3 full instructional cycles, which included homework, learning plans, quizzes, and reflection or evaluation. It relied on 2 main structures, reflective journaling and writing to explain. The real secret sauce here was those personalized learning plans. They acted as a bridge, seamlessly connecting the students' inner reflections directly to how they'd apply the material later.
Now, this next part is vital if you want students to be honest, rather than just writing what they think you want to read. The research team completely separated the assessments. It is so important to note that course grades did not rise because of these writing-to-learn scores. The researchers used the rigorous Ennis critical thinking rubric strictly to analyze the writing for their own independent research. The students never even saw those scores. For their actual course grades, students were evaluated with a separate, low-stakes completion rubric. By rewarding honest effort, it made it safe for students to actually admit when they were confused.
When we look at that independent research data, the results are pretty striking. The cohort saw a full 1-point leap in average critical thinking dispositions, jumping from about 2.18 up to 3.18. If you're wondering what we mean by disposition, it's basically the student's internal attitude toward learning, things like intellectual humility and open-mindedness. The biggest gains were actually in inquisitiveness and their confidence in reasoning. They weren't just getting better at math, their whole mindset for tackling tough engineering concepts was evolving. To really show you what that shift towards strategic metacognition looks like, check out this actual quote from a student in the pilot. They said, "Figuring out why the current divides in parallel branches, not just how to calculate it, made the whole concept click." That is exactly what we want to hear. Before this intervention, journal entries were pretty vague, stuff like, "I need to study more." But by the end, these students were taking real internal ownership of the why behind the physics and actively diagnosing their own misunderstandings. And beautifully mirroring that growth in their dispositions, we saw an identical 1-point jump in their overall critical thinking abilities. The baseline started at roughly 1.82 and climbed up to 2.82 on the research rubric. Having to put complex physical processes into their own words was clearly, demonstrably deepening their conceptual understanding.
But let's break that down, because it reveals where the friction still lies. Analytical thinking saw massive improvements, with about 45% of the cohort reaching proficient or exemplary levels. However, judiciousness, which is the ability to evaluate evidence and make sound judgments, stayed pretty weak. Only about 18% hit proficient there. This is a massive takeaway for us as educators. Evaluative judgment is a tough, higher-order skill, and this shows we absolutely need more targeted pedagogy to build it up throughout the curriculum.
Okay, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, generative AI. To handle this, the team used those 2 distinct structures we mentioned earlier. For the writing to explain tasks directly linked to problem solving, they relied on in-class handwriting. This heavily reduced the chance of someone just copy-pasting an AI response. The reflective journals, on the other hand, were take-home. To keep things authentic, researchers cross-referenced those take-home journals with the in-class handwriting to check for stylistic consistency. Now, we're not saying AI use was entirely impossible, but the team could confidently report that no AI-generated content compromised their research analysis. So where do we go from here? Well, the researchers are extending an open invitation to colleagues across the engineering education space. This pilot is a great equity-focused model, but to get robust, generalizable evidence, we need more data. They are asking faculty to use this hybrid cycle in their own courses, collect local data, analyze it together, and even co-publish with the community. It's a fantastic effort, and it's all supported by the National Science Foundation under Grant EES 2306566.
Which leaves us with one final thought. How might you adapt this exact hybrid writing-to-learn cycle to empower the next generation of critical thinkers in your own STEM courses? Even small changes, like a quick reflective learning plan after a quiz, or shifting to a low-stakes grading rubric for reflections, can make a huge difference. Imagine transforming your students from mere calculators into true judicious engineers. Thank you so much for joining me for this briefing. Let's get out there and build the next generation of critical thinkers.